Hello, everybody. I'm Gigi Stonewoods at MSNBC headquarters in New York. Happening now on this Earth Day. Tens of thousands of people making their voices heard around the world. First, we go to NBC's Ali Vitale, who's at the main march at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Ali, what's going on where you are? Now, joining me now to talk about all of this and weigh in is Democratic Congressman Bill Foster of Illinois. He's a member of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee. Thanks for being here, Congressman.
Well, thank you.
You're the only PhD physicist in Congress. You're in D.C. marching with thousands of protesters today, but not as a politician, as a scientist. Why is this march important? It's bringing so many scientists out of the lab, people like yourself. Why do you think it has such a strong turnout?
Well, I think scientists are really being energized by two things. First, as you mentioned, the cuts that...
Democratic Congressman Bill Foster of Illinois, thanks for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
President Trump celebrated Earth Day with a tweet. He says he's committed to preserving the natural beauty of our nation, but that tweet does come less than a month after he signed an executive order dismantling many Obama-era environmental protections. Now, today, the president and the First Lady made a surprise visit to the Walter Reed Medical Center. There, he awarded a Purple Heart to Sergeant First Class Alvaro Barrientos, who was recently wounded in Afghanistan. A nice surprise for him and his family as he recovers. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell is at the White House with the latest there. Kelly?
Good afternoon, Gigi. While
A showdown over health care may lead to a government shutdown Friday, and no budget solution is in sight. President Trump is offering Democrats a deal, funding for insurance subsidies under Obamacare in exchange for money to build that border wall. Now, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer mocked that offer as a non-starter, saying he thought Mexico was supposed to pay for that wall. And for a president craving a big victory before his first 100 days ends next Saturday, a government shutdown would, of course, be a major setback. So joining me now to talk about all of this is Ginger Gibson, political correspondent for Reuters, and Rochelle Riley, columnist at the Detroit Free Press. Thanks for being with us on this Saturday.
Absolutely.
All right, Ginger, you first. The budget battle set to dominate this week. We have so much on the agenda between a new tax plan, replacing Obamacare. As we stand now, how likely is it we're going to see a government shutdown on top of all of this?
There remains a possibility that the government could shut down after this Friday's deadline lapses. House Republicans are taking this threat really seriously. They worked today on a Saturday. We don't normally see that in Congress, holding a conference call with Republican members. And a GOP source tells us that Speaker Ryan told his members that he's still working to achieve some kind of deal, and that whenever they get the votes to be able to pass it, they'll move forward with a vote. But at this point, they're not saying that they have those votes or even a deal, making the turmoil continue into the coming days.
Rochelle, how important is it for President Trump to avoid the kind of debacle he saw with health care last time? How much pressure is he going to put on Republicans?
Well, I don't know if he's feeling the pressure, but I know that for people across the country, particularly in middle America, this would be yet one more example, one more piece of evidence that this administration is governing like 5-year-old children with the attention span of a Saturday morning. There's no strategy, there's no planning. A potential government shutdown on top of not getting any kind of deal on health care, not having a budget plan, and, tax plan being a pipe dream. It's beginning to really look like they're out of control.
But there are really specific ramifications here, Ginger. More than 300,000 people in Michigan are signed up through Obamacare. They're already worried coverage may be taken away. What do you think the political ramifications are if this healthcare fight actually leads to this feared government shutdown?
The optics of this could be really bad. Even just saying that they're willing to trade healthcare dollars for wall dollars, that's like trading sick people for a border wall that doesn't have robust support across the political spectrum. That could be very dangerous. We know that Republicans think that they shut the government down the last time and didn't have any real political ramifications for that. But people are paying attention, and they left Republicans completely in charge. So it's going to be hard for them to say that a government shutdown belongs to Democrats when they control all of Washington at this point.
And how much of this has to do with, President Trump is saying this 100 days is just symbolic, but historically it is how we have judged presidents in the past. And he is saying that this is silly, but he does seem to be trying to put a legislative feather in the administration's cap ahead of this symbolic mark. Michelle.
Well, I think he has set this own deadline and set up himself for failure because he wanted to do so much so quickly. So while it may seem silly now, he told people he would do many things on day one, and then he promised to do things within that first 100 days. And so far, he's not had the victories that he thought. And when you're talking about working class families in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pittsburgh and places that have been hurt by the economy and hurt by people not paying attention, they are absolutely watching.
And just this afternoon, Paul Ryan told his conference there will be no vote on health care next week, despite the president pushing for a replacement bill. Is this another blow to the president? And he's talking now about this new tax plan on Wednesday. Is the administration biting off more than it can chew? Ginger?
We've seen the administration start to come to the reality that Congress doesn't exactly take directions the way they would like to give them all of the time, and that it might not happen as quickly as possible. This is a lot. This is a White House that has shown struggles juggling one ball, juggling three balls could prove to be very difficult for them. We have minimal expectations about how much depth we're going to get from the administration on Wednesday with that tax plan. I'm told by the administration that it'll be broad principles, not a lot of details. So that may be a piece that gets quietly rolled out and then forgotten about by the time we get to a Friday shutdown deadline. But there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of risk, especially for an administration that's still trying to figure out how to keep the trains running on time to try to do all three things at once.
And President Trump's own Treasury officials, Rochelle, were surprised by this news of tax cuts. How much specific information are we going to get this week? Is it even possible that something like a tax cut, which Americans really do like, this is an opportunity for a positive headline for President Trump if he's able to pull it off. But how likely is this that it could be possible without any real details being announced and that we know of?
Well, I think one of the challenges you have is when your budget director says that you're not looking at the deficit as you try to figure out how to gather revenue. It's very impossible to do. You have to look at gross revenues and net revenues because you have to know where you're spending money. I think for the Trump administration, it needs to consider the possibility that it should stop juggling several things and find one thing that it can accomplish quickly and effectively before it moves to something else. Right now, it seems like there are several balls in the air, and all of them are going to drop.
Right. Whether the tax cuts will be revenue neutral is one of the many questions looming about this tax cut plan. Ginger, another hallmark of the president's first 100 days has been Russia, the FBI, the congressional investigations, all of this looming over the administration. Thursday, the House Intelligence Committee asked former acting Attorney General Sally Yates to testify publicly, also invited FBI Director James Comey and National Security Agency Director Mike Rogers to testify in a closed-door meeting. We're getting new revelations. Is all of this testimony and this looming Russian collusion threat going to hamper the president's agenda even further?
It is a distraction, and it's a distraction the White House doesn't want. If they're trying to juggle multiple things, multiple balls, the last thing they want is someone throwing additional balls at them while they're trying to do that juggling. There's a risk that it derails their message every day. Every time someone's talking about Russia is a day that they're not talking about the tax plan, is time that they're not talking about infrastructure or the Veterans Administration or creating jobs or changing steel policy or all the other things the White House wants people to be talking about. And it still remains a risk that it could snowball out of control, that the White House could lose control of the message, and that the House or the Senate doing these investigations should start to uncover even unrelated things. We've seen that historically happen with administrations that cause even more problems.
Especially for a president very concerned about optics. One of the things he's doing, Rochelle, is holding a rally Saturday in Pennsylvania to mark those first 100 days. What achievements will he be able to give to his supporters, considering we have a lot of executive orders, Supreme Court pick, but not a lot of legislative successes?
Well, he's proven in the past that with these rallies, he can keep his supporters' attention away from other things. In this case, it's the White House Correspondents' Dinner. But it also means they're not talking about the budget. They're not talking about health care. They're not talking about Russiagate. And I'm just stunned sometimes at the idea that he would be out doing something like that instead of really focusing on one of these situations, one of these issues to have a victory. I think while he's having a rally with supporters, he should be trying to figure out how to fill some of the ambassadorships in 50 countries because the State Department is in a mess. And then he's got attorneys general that he has to pick, and that's not done. So it's almost like there's no real work going on while they're trying to pretend at work. And if you had one word to describe this White House, it would be chaos.
Well, they do have a lot of work ahead. That is indisputable, but his support from his fan base is unwavering. Rochelle Riley and Ginger Gibson, thank you for joining us on this Saturday.
Thank you.
Voters in France getting ready to elect a new president, and it comes in the shadow of the most recent terror attack in Paris. Could that help the far-right candidate who's been compared to Donald Trump? We'll see in a minute. Chilling new video from the Paris shooting attack that killed a police officer.
फायरिंग हो गई बेटा और भेजो
France this weekend is going from the chaos of Thursday's assault on the Champs-Élysées to the dramatic uncertainty that the country's election brings. Thousands of police and soldiers are on patrol with the first round of presidential voting tomorrow after the shooting by a man carrying a note supporting ISIS. Now, this latest terror in Paris could help put Marine Le Pen in office, the far-right candidate known for her hardline on Muslims and immigrants. She wants France to leave the EU and drop the euro, and she is skeptical of NATO. Le Pen also has a warm relationship with Russian leader Vladimir Putin. President Trump thinks the attack will have a, quote, big effect on the election. He's not endorsing Le Pen, but he does call her the strongest candidate on issues like borders. Now, her main rival is Emmanuel Macron, who is on the center left. He wants France to stay in the EU. Now, he talked this week by phone with former President Obama, who also stopped short of an endorsement.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. President. How are you?
The main message I have is to wish you all the best in the coming days, and make sure that, as you said, you work hard all the way through, because you never know. It might be that last day of campaigning that
Yeah, I do agree.
makes all the difference.
With us from Paris, MSNBC contributor Christopher Dickey, world news editor for the Daily Beast. Thanks for being with us, Chris.
My pleasure, Gigi.
I think some Americans might be watching and think, French elections, what does that have to do with me? And the answer is a lot, because if France decides to ride this anti-globalization wave and elect a candidate that would leave the euro, it could have far-reaching implications for the U.S. economy. So I have to ask you, 1 in 3 French voters right now said to be undecided. Are you sensing a shift toward either candidate in the wake of this latest terror attack?
Well, actually, the polls taken after the terror attack suggest that Emmanuel Macron, the centrist, is stronger than ever. But you really can't trust that. As you point out, 1 in 3 voters claim to be undecided. I think in France you have to take that with a grain of salt. A lot of people say they're undecided when they're asked by pollsters, but in fact they've made up their minds. And the truth is, we just don't know how they've made up their minds. There are 4 candidates, not just Marine Le Pen and Emmanuel Macron, but also a very far leftist, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, and a former Prime Minister, François Fillon, all of whom could emerge tomorrow night as one of the 2 candidates, or 2 of the 2 candidates, who will go into the final presidential election on May 7th. So it's really up in the air.
And hanging over all of this is, of course, this recent terrible terrorist attack. Is terrorism now dominating the political conversation in this election?
Well, it isn't dominating the political conversation, although Marine Le Pen would like it to, and François Fillon would like it to, because they're both very hardline on Muslims and immigration and so on. But people are definitely nervous. There's a building very near here where some of my friends work, that was searched just a couple of hours ago because somebody thought they saw somebody with a balaclava, a mask, somewhere on the roof. That wasn't the truth. That wasn't the case. But the police came and they searched that. Earlier today, there was an incident at a major train station here where a man walked in with a knife. He obviously was a little deranged, but he wasn't a terrorist. In fact, when the police stopped him, he said he was just terrified himself. He just needed to defend himself, but people saw him with the knife and they panicked and they fled. So I would say people are very, very nervous.
It sounds like there's a lot of anxiety in that city. But we do have to discuss this political conversation with the election looming and the idea of Frexit, which surprised so many people when Britain decided to leave the EU. Marine Le Pen supports this. Where do the French stand from your conversations on this idea of leaving the European Union?
Well, you know, I've been following Marine Le Pen for a long time, and she's very articulate on this. She says if you look at history, whenever Europeans have had a chance to vote in a referendum about European unity, more Europe, more EU, they voted against it. And the classic case here was in 2005. There was a European constitution that had been written very much by the French. A former French president, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, had been the head of the drafting committee, and the French voted it down. They voted against it. And it was only after the governments got together that they were able to pass the Lisbon Treaty and move ahead with the European Union. So she looks to that, and I think a lot of people should look to that and say, if she holds a referendum right after she's elected, if that happens, she can probably count on a very skeptical vote here in France. And if that happens, then one of the two core countries in the European Union will withdraw, which would be the end of it. And if that happens, we can also see NATO weakening dramatically. And if that happens, we see the whole European sphere opened up to Russian, how shall I say, ambitions, both economically and territorially. So is it an apocalyptic vision? Yeah, actually it is.
Well, you do speak of Russia, and Le Pen has this close friendship with Vladimir Putin. Is this going to help or hurt her? Because we have seen President Trump's relations with Putin sour quite quickly.
Yes, but there's a lot of inbuilt anti-Americanism. Well, the French are very funny when it comes to the United States, and that reflects their attitudes toward Russia. The attitude of 3 of the 4 leading candidates toward Russia is very favorable. Fillon, Le Pen, and Mélenchon. Mélenchon has even talked about renegotiating the borders of Europe with Russia. So she's not an outlier on that one. Actually, it's Macron, the centrist, with Obama's support, who looks like he's very different from the rest of the field. But we'll see how that plays out. The fact is, Putin, Russia, stands to be the very big winner of this election if we're talking about any of the 3 candidates winning except Macron.
Well, an interesting election with far-reaching implications. Christopher Dickey in Paris, thanks.
Thank you, Gigi.
They may not be the first people you think of when it comes to angry protests in the street, but today scientists are actually demonstrating across the country against what they see as a war on facts. And I will be joined by one of the organizers of today's Earth Day marches. Stay with us. Rallies today across the country and around the world marking Earth Day with marches for science. Tens of thousands of people are out today, even in the rain, drawing attention to the need for more federal funding to government programs that support science research. Now, others are pushing back against lawmakers who ignore fact-based data when enacting policy. And joining me now is one of the organizers of today's march, marine biologist and conservation strategist, Ayanna Johnson. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Why did you feel the need to organize this march?
I was really concerned by what I was seeing in terms of policy. We were seeing scientists being censored and silenced. We were starting to see data sets disappear from government websites. Obviously, the funding, the threats of funding cuts were really concerning. EPA budget by 70%. And that's the funding that keeps our drinking water safe and our air clean and our food safe to eat. When you cut the budget of the National Institute of Health, that has real implications for our health and well-being. And it seemed like the problem was that the public didn't understand the value of science in our everyday lives, and that was a failing on the part of the scientific community. So one of the main goals of the March for Science in the long term is to make sure that we improve scientific outreach and communication, as well as the second being improving scientific literacy across the U.S. and the world by making sure that people have great opportunities to access really good scientific education.
President Trump is taking notice of today's activities. He did tweet on this, at least today on Earth Day. He said, "We celebrate our beautiful forests, lakes, and land. We stand committed to preserving the natural beauty of our nation." So what's your reaction to this? Do you think that the president understands the need to science and climate change efforts? Is he celebrating Earth Day?
I don't know. I wish I had a crystal ball. I mean, I can't read his mind, but certainly if what he wants to do is protect our rivers and streams and forests, then that takes us dedicated policy efforts. That means you have to fund the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Interior and the Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA, because those are the agencies that do that really important work.
All right. Well, on the campaign trail, President Trump criticized Barack Obama for the landmark Paris Climate Accord to curb greenhouse emissions. And so far, Trump hasn't said what his administration is going to do. If you could speak directly to the president, you can't read his mind, but you can talk to him. What would you say?
I would say the science is settled. Climate change is real, and the question is only what are we going to do about it? And so it's been a really amazing opportunity to be part of planning this March for Science, because we're seeing a huge array of scientific societies and NGOs and museums and aquaria all come together with universities to talk about the value of science in society. So that's been what I've been working on as co-director of partnerships, trying to build this broad and diverse coalition of almost 300 organizations across the world who are really want to make sure that science continues to play a critical role in evidence-based policymaking. That's the major thrust of this, is that we have this amazing thing called the scientific method, and so what we really need to be doing is using that to inform the decisions that we make.
So many scientists coming out of their labs today to join in this political effort. Ayanna Johnson, thank you.
Thank you.
A crucial time for President Trump's foreign policy agenda as tensions continue to build with North Korea. We'll dive into that with a former ambassador and former White House policy advisor. And next hour, my colleague Yasmin Vasugian looks at the Bill O'Reilly sexual harassment scandal and what it says about the changing workplace in America. Stick around. With the threat of North Korea launching another missile at any time, the USS Carl Vinson is said to arrive in the Sea of Japan before the end of the month. Now, that word today from Vice President Mike Pence, who is traveling in Australia with his Asia-Pacific tour winding down. In Sydney, Pence joined Australia's Prime Minister, urging China to put pressure on North Korea.
The President and I have great confidence that China will properly deal with Korea. But as President Trump made clear just a few short days ago, if China is unable to deal with North Korea, the United States and our allies will.
Meanwhile, Defense Secretary James Mattis is in the Middle East meeting with the Emir of Qatar. Iran, ISIS, and Syria were all expected to come up. So let's take a look at the Trump foreign policy agenda with former U.S. Ambassador to Morocco, Mark Ginsburg. He is also a former White House Middle East policy advisor. Thanks for joining us, Ambassador.
Good to be with you.
All right, let's start with North Korea. In general, President Trump has said that he is trying to be unpredictable, that he doesn't want his adversaries to know where he's coming from. Is there value in this unpredictability, or is this just a lack of cohesive foreign policy?
No, I think there really is a great strategy in unpredictability, particularly when it comes to North Korea, because after all, it's the North Koreans who are trying to be unpredictable with respect to their nuclear weapons program. So those of us who've been in the foreign policy game don't always want to broadcast our goals and objectives. But at the same time, I'm not going to give the Trump administration a complete pass. There has been a lot of ball dropping here with respect to what happened to the Vincent, the aircraft carrier. It was heading south when the president said it was heading north. Things like that. So you want to make sure that if you're going to be unpredictable, you at least know what you're doing in your unpredictability.
Absolutely, not just bellicose rhetoric. Vice President Pence went to the Korean demilitarized zone on Monday. We've seen leaders from Reagan to Obama do the same. Does the North take that seriously? What's different here?
I think the North is beginning to take it seriously because they're mostly concerned about a potential real strategic alliance with the Chinese and the Americans to squeeze them. Look, throughout the last 3 decades, every successive American president has tried to convince the Chinese to really turn the screws on the North Koreans. And the Chinese just have done a little screw turning. They've really never stopped the banking relationships. They've never stopped the food exports to North Korea. They've never stopped the coal imports completely. They've never really put the sanctions on the way we put sanctions on Iran, that forced it to the negotiating table.
So what does the Trump administration do besides cozying up to China to put the pressure on China, to put the pressure on North Korea, if that's the diplomatic tack we have to take?
Well, I think that if I were the Chinese and I was sitting across from President Trump, I would be damn worried that the president was indeed going to act militarily against the North Koreans. Look, after all, the North Korean regime has threatened to build and test a ballistic missile that could carry a nuclear warhead that would hit the West Coast. They already have missiles that can hit American military bases in the Western Pacific. Now, do you take this seriously? Is a lot of bellicosity? I myself haven't yet met anyone in the United States who really knows how to gauge the true intents of the North Korean regime.
Right, a lot of worrisome.
Maybe Dennis Rodman does, but I don't.
Over a piece of chocolate cake. A lot of worrisome issues right here. Ambassador Mark Ginsburg, thanks for breaking it down for us.
Sure, good to be with you.
Up next, Senator Bernie Sanders and DNC Chair Tom Perez joined forces to heal the divisions in the Democratic Party. A live look from Las Vegas coming up. DNC Chair Tom Perez and Senator Bernie Sanders teamed up for their Come Together Fight Back tour. They started in Maine, and the last stop was Las Vegas. Sanders and Perez hoping to energize their Democratic base against President Donald Trump and the GOP party. Now, the tour consisted of visiting 7 red states that the Democrats lost in the 2016 election and 2 purple states Democrats won in 2012 and 2016. Now, the duo addressed key policy issues on the tour, such as health care, immigration reform, and equal pay for women. NBC's Alex Seitz-Wald is in Las Vegas and joins us live. Alex, what are you hearing?
Well, the tour has just wrapped, as you said, and after this week, I think we can say it was a mixed success. I mean, they had Bernie Sanders and Tom Perez out here, 2 guys who have in the past been on opposite sides of the DNC chair race. Bernie Sanders backed a different candidate, Keith Ellison, but the fact that he came out here a year and a half after fighting a tough primary battle against Hillary Clinton, in which he accused the DNC of meddling with the process, and the fact that Tom Perez invited him out here, I think shows the direction that the party is trying to head in. And Tom Perez took some venting from some people, took some frustration, but he wanted to kind of come out and put a down payment on reaching out to this side of the party that will at least hopefully buy some trust, and then maybe down the road fully unify the party at the end. But I think everyone is happy that this tour is over who was involved in it.
It's supposed to be a unity tour. Does it highlight some of the divisions within the Democratic Party, though?
Yeah, it certainly did. I mean, there was a bit of a controversy early in the week when Bernie Sanders declined to say that John Ossoff, who's the candidate in that Georgia congressional election, is a progressive. And then there was also a separate controversy when he campaigned for a mayoral candidate in Omaha, Nebraska, who has a mixed record on abortion. That caught some flack from pro-choice groups. But, again, this is a party that lost. And when you win elections, the party looks very happy and everyone gets together. And when you lose, that's not the case. So it's going to take a lot of work, and I think this was the beginning of a process, and maybe after this week, they'll see that it will take a little bit longer than they had initially hoped.
NBC's Alex Seitz-Wald, thank you. Let's continue now with a look at the Democrats. The fractures deep within that party are a little harder to ignore today. And joining us now is conservative commentator Kirsten Haglund and David Burstein, CEO of Run for America, an organization devoted to bringing a new generation of voters and candidates into the system. Thanks for being here. Speaking of bringing in this new Democratic Party, the new voices, we've got Bernie Sanders up there, who's like the most mobilizing figure in the Democratic Party, even though he's registered as an independent. But don't we need to see some new blood to bring the Democratic Party together?
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, look, the Democratic Party not only lost, but right now they are a rudderless ship. No one can even tell you who the leader of the Democratic Party is. It's not Bernie Sanders. It's not Tom Perez. The real people, the real energy in the Democratic Party are hundreds of thousands of people across this country. You see them marching today. You saw them marching, all year, who are are activists, and those are the people actually leading the party. And a lot of those people need to start channeling their efforts away from protests, which may continue to draw attention, but not actually change anything, and actually stepping up to run. There's more energy, and we see it every day at Run for America, in people who actually want to step up and serve their country. We need to actually start seeing more of those people step up to the plate, because the Democratic Party needs it badly. It's not going to be solved by either Bernie Sanders or by another generation of people who've been in the system for too long. The world has changed too much. The landscape has really changed in a really meaningful way, and the Democratic Party needs to start listening to that and understanding that, and spend more time actually talking to those people. And hopefully this tour is the beginning of that, but clearly they got a long way to go.
Both parties are very fractured right now, Kirsten. What does the Democratic Party need to do to bring itself together? The Republican Party need to do to bring itself together. There are a lot of different voices out there fighting.
There are, and it's interesting the difference between how the parties look in Washington versus how they look on the ground. Because in Washington, the Democrats are very united right now against Donald Trump. Unfortunately, they don't really have any other suggestions about how they want to move forward. It's just this opposition because they're being pushed by these liberal activist groups like David describes. Republicans, though, too, are fighting their own battles. You've got this division that we're seeing play itself out with healthcare right now between the House Freedom Caucus and those that are a little bit more moderate. And as we've seen over the last couple of weeks, as these members go home to their districts, where maybe there are 23 House members where Hillary won their district, but they're moderate Republicans having to figure out how to deal with these two very passionate sides of the aisle, people who very passionately dislike Donald Trump and those who absolutely love him. So these members are, especially the ones in swing states, are trying to find that delicate balance right now. And at the end of the day, they not only need to run, these Democrats or Republicans too, but Democrats need to get out and vote, because that's why Trump won and they didn't show up at the polls.
Democrats also need to start actually having a vision. All we have heard for the past 6 months now is why Donald Trump is the worst. The same stuff that, frankly, they said for 18 months and failed
same things Republicans did with Obama.
And so the Democrats are falling into the same trap the Republicans fell into under Obama, of saying no to everything, opposing everything, and really they're playing the entire game on Trump's turf.
Congress has so much to do this week. They're coming back from this recess. They are going to deal with this new tax plan that's going to be announced Wednesday, potentially. Healthcare reform again, and they want to avoid another debacle. And of course, the biggest looming threat, this government shutdown that could happen as early as Friday. Are they biting off more than they can chew, the administration? How is all of this going to happen?
Well, with the budget showdown, you actually might see some unique bipartisanship here because of the fact that they didn't have the win. Republicans didn't have the win on healthcare that they wanted, and they know that tax reform is looming. They don't want to shut down the government. It would look very bad for the GOP, and they really would have no one else to blame because they are in power in the House, Senate, and the White House. So that's partial good news. With the healthcare bill, it'll be interesting to see if Ryan can bring these two factions, as I described earlier, together, because they've got something for both, right? They've got red meat for both. You've got the essential health benefits, which are going to stay intact. However, this state waiver. So the good news would be that it passes in the House and then it goes to the Senate, where you'll see some more debate. The bill will change a little bit more, and they can at least show something that's in progress. So the compromise between the two House factions might happen this week.
None of this is going to matter if they don't have the votes. And this is what's so astounding about this, is that this is a unified Congress that we're looking at, and they still can't manage to avoid a debacle. So we will see what happens in the week ahead. Kirsten Hagland and David Burstein, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That about wraps it up for this hour on MSNBC. I'm Gigi Stonewoods. Stay with us for much more news. In our next hour, my colleague Yasmin Vasugian picks things up right after the break, including the very latest on global marches taking place today on Earth Day in support of science.